What is up, guys? Blue Spooky here. Got another 2-hour mega mix of new stories for you. If you guys are enjoying these long 2-hour videos, please make sure you're liking, sharing, commenting, and subscribing if you enjoy them after you're done with the video. If you guys have any thoughts about the stories in the video or anything else, please be sure to leave those in the comments, as those are my favorite part of making these sorts of videos. Plus, all that stuff really helps out with the algorithm, so I can afford to make these longer videos as much as possible. They've been doing pretty well so far, so if we can get another 1,000 likes or so, I would be really happy with that. Either way though, guys, I will see you at the outro at the end of the video, and I hope you guys enjoy the next 2 hours of scary story goodness. Have a great day. One of the scariest moments of my life happened when I went to Target last year. I went there one night to do some normal grocery shopping. There was a Target not that far at all from where I live, and I went there almost weekly. I go there sometimes at night to grab groceries as well. I don't recall exactly what time it was. When I went inside, I grabbed a cart and started gathering up all the items I would need. I was inside the store probably for about 20 minutes or so, shopping and minding my own business. Eventually, I checked out and started heading back to my car. I had not even parked that far away from the entrance of the store. When I arrived at my vehicle, which was a pretty standard sedan, I noticed something odd. I was behind it and about to go around and put the groceries in the back seat when I looked through the window and saw somebody looking at me through the back from inside my car. It was a man. I couldn't see him well at all because he ducked down less than a second after I noticed him. I freaked out and left the cart right there. I ran back inside the Target. After making it back into the store, I dialed 911 and called the police. I told them that a random stranger was inside my car at Target. I waited inside the store for the police to arrive. It took less than 5 minutes for them to get there, but in the meantime, while I was waiting for them, I was standing a little ways inside the store, hiding in the first aisle. As I was waiting there for the police to arrive, I saw the man that had been in my car enter the store and begin looking around. He immediately walked to the right and didn't appear to have noticed me yet. I wasn't 100% sure though, because like I said, I'd only seen him for a split second inside my car window. I was about 80% sure it was the same guy though. I went further into the aisle, just in case he really was looking for me or something. A short time later, the police arrived. I went out of the store with them, and they checked out my vehicle. Whoever was inside was now gone, but my doors had all been left unlocked. I thought that I must have somehow forgot to lock them when I went inside of Target. I didn't have anything inside my car worth stealing though. I usually kept it pretty empty and clean. Still, what was that random man doing inside my car? I had never seen him before in my life. I gave his description to the police and also let them know I thought I'd seen him in the Target store. I made it clear that I was not 100% sure, but I was pretty certain it was him. The man had dark hair, was sort of short, and wearing a tan t-shirt and jeans. He also appeared to be pretty young, in his mid-20s or early 30s. The police told me they would go inside and see if he was still there. I stayed by my car talking to another officer for maybe 5 or 10 more minutes. The officer came back and said they did not locate the man inside. They figured he must have left and said they would take one more look around the store. I could go home if I wanted to. At that point, I finally left to drive home. Now, the Target I go to is near a lot of other stores, but the way I exit is I drive down the road to the side of the Target, then go down a more quiet road that leads to more stores about 1/4 of a mile down. As I was driving down that quiet road, I saw that guy randomly walking alongside it. It was weird because there was no sidewalk there, and it wasn't very well lit. You wouldn't expect to see anyone walking in this area. Not at this time of night, at least. Just seconds later, I realized it was the exact same guy. I was approaching him. He turned and saw me, and that's when he bolted out onto the street. Suddenly, it was like he was running toward me. I veered to the right to avoid him. I wasn't going very fast, but luckily he didn't get to me, and I was able to successfully maneuver around him. I sped away from him as he stood there in the road. No other cars were nearby. I got out my phone and called the police to report the guy. After that, I was finally able to make it back home okay. Looking back, I still can't believe it happened at all. I avoided that target for weeks after. Eventually, I was able to go back and still shop there sometimes today even. Nothing like that has happened since, and I haven't ever seen that guy again either. I'm hoping that whoever he was, the police managed to find him, or that he at least stopped his wild behavior. I used to be a manager at a Target for a few years. I actually worked at the Target for a long time. I started as a cashier in high school and then worked there part-time in college. The degree I got in college helped me to become a manager, but I also moved up over the years. I knew the store very well, and at the time of this story, I had been working there for 8 years. I was working one night on a seemingly normal Thursday. It had been pretty busy from 5 p.m. to 7, and now that it was a little bit past 7, things were starting to quiet down a lot. I was watching over the checkout lanes amongst other things when I received a call about something. It wasn't exactly clear what was going on. I immediately headed over to the aisle I was told to. When I got there, I saw that one of our team members, Chloe, was there, as well as another team member named Tim. There was also a man with them. The three of them seemed to be in a heated disagreement. When I got there, Tim said the guy had been harassing Chloe, following her around the store. The man instantly started denying it and was being really aggressive. Chloe also said that the man had been following her around. The man began screaming over them. I went over and asked him what was going on in his words. He started cursing at me and screaming almost immediately. It was clear I wasn't going to be able to have a conversation with this guy. At that point, I asked him to leave, which, as you might guess, he did not take very well at all. I told him I was going to call the police if he didn't leave immediately. He started walking away, heading toward the front of the store. Several other people standing around were all staring at us. I followed the man all the way to the front of the store to make sure he really was going. Before leaving, he stopped and cursed me out at the top of his lungs. I couldn't even really make out everything he said. Basically, he was just saying he didn't do anything wrong, and how dare we accuse him. He went on to say I was terrible at my job, and he was going to sue me and all that other stuff, blah blah blah. At last, he finally left. I had actually come pretty close to calling the police on him. After the man left the store, it was a huge relief. I went back over to Chloe and asked her about the situation. She told me that when she was working, she started to notice the guy staring at her from a ways away. After she saw him looking at her for 3 minutes straight, she moved, and he approached closer. She said she tried to move aisles 4 times, and each time the man moved with her. He didn't seem to be doing any shopping at all. The man then approached her in one of the aisles, and she questioned why he was following her. He denied it, and that's when Tim, who was working nearby, overheard and tried to intervene. Tim said that he even noticed the man walking down 2 aisles after her and wondered what was going on. It sounded like this guy was a real creep. After about 10 minutes, I got another call. This time it was from our cart attendant, who was working out in the parking lot. He said somebody was speeding around recklessly. I headed up to the front of the store and met our attendant just inside the doors. Sure enough, we looked out, and there was a car going up and down the aisles at a speed way too fast. Thankfully, it was later at night, so nobody was out walking to or from their cars at the moment. Still, it was extremely dangerous. I could hear the tires squealing as the car went down one row and shot up the next. It was like he was doing laps around the lot as fast as he could and making sure to hit each aisle. I called the police right then and there, reporting a reckless driver. The police were on their way. I watched from the exit doors and stopped any guests from leaving the store until the car was gone. Pretty soon, there were about 10 people waiting around the doors, watching this maniac blast up and down the aisles. When he was going up one of them, he appeared to lose control and crashed into a parked car. Nobody was inside the other vehicle, thankfully. After hitting it, the man's car skidded forward and came to a stop in the middle of the aisle. The driver's door then opened, and a man emerged. Big surprise, it was the same guy who had been following Chloe around. I was shocked, but also not surprised at the same time. The guy then took off running toward the parking lot of a nearby restaurant. The police got there shortly after. Several of us spoke to officers. Other officers went out to search for the man. They caught him a short time later. He turned out to be extremely drunk and must have gone on that joyride out of spite or something. I really don't know, but clearly the man was crazy. I'm just glad the police caught him, so he couldn't do any more harm. This took place several years ago. It all started one night when I was driving home from work. It was rather late, I think a little bit past 10 p.m. My job back then was almost 30 minutes away, and I lived in a house that was a little bit out there. It was sort of far from the city, in the midst of a bunch of woods and country land. This night, when I was driving home, I was on a quiet road just a few miles away from my house. And that was when I saw a man on the side of the road, sticking his hand out like he was hitchhiking. It was one of the most bizarre things I'd ever seen. It was so unusual to see anyone out here, let alone a hitchhiker. I'd never seen a single one before. How did the man even get there if he was hitchhiking? There wasn't even a sidewalk nearby. Obviously, I was not going to stop and give this guy a ride. I passed him by and he looked at me. He waved and really seemed to want me to stop. I would have been crazy to do so, though. Shortly after, I made it home. Now fast forward to a couple of days later. I was out driving again. I wasn't coming home from work this time, but instead from the nearest grocery store and after shopping. It was nighttime, but not very late, maybe around 8 o'clock or so. As I was leaving the store and about to merge onto the highway, I saw the guy standing on a sidewalk. At first, I didn't remember him, but when I did, I couldn't believe he was still here in town. I was thinking to myself, what are the odds of seeing this guy again? After that, I just went home. Fast forward one more time. It was a few nights after that. I was coming home from work late at night again. My work schedule was all over the place back then. I never really knew what time I would get off, and I was also scheduled at all kinds of different hours. It was very unpredictable. There I was driving home. I made it all the way to my street. It was a very quiet street, obviously. The yards are large and heavily wooded. The houses are very spread out. It's a nice place to live if you value privacy. While I was driving down the street, though, I couldn't believe my eyes. I saw that hitchhiker guy again. He was actively hitchhiking this time. He looked directly at me as I approached and tried to wave me down. The guy had a backpack on as well. I actually almost stopped just to ask him what on earth he was doing out here. I knew he did not live on my street, and I didn't think he lived around here either. If he did, I have no clue why he would be trying to hitchhike. I had a bad feeling about him, so I just passed him by. Seconds later, I arrived home and turned into my driveway. I drove up, parked, got out, and went inside. I was puzzled by the strange man, but I brushed it off. I didn't think about calling the police on him or anything. When I worked late, I also had a tendency to stay up even later. For me personally, it takes a while to unwind after getting home. It's rare I can just get home and fall right to sleep just like that. It was around midnight, and I had been home for just over an hour. I was in the living room eating something and watching TV. For whatever reason, I just had the feeling I needed to glance out the front window. When I did, I saw a figure in the yard, right near a tree. When I looked closer, I noticed it was that exact same guy. My front yard is large and partially wooded. The guy was near the woods, separating my yard from the street. I watched him just standing there, looking in my direction. I had no clue if he could see me or not. It was really dark and he was pretty far away. I looked away to grab my phone and dial 911. When I looked back, he was already gone. There were a million places he could have gone. I looked out the window for several minutes, but couldn't find any signs of the man. I went around to just about every window inside my house to see if I could locate this man. I couldn't find him anywhere. I figured and also hoped he had just left and gone somewhere else to do who knows what. I tried to just return to watching TV to take my mind off things. It was difficult when I felt paranoid the guy would return, though. I was looking out the window every 2 seconds. All of a sudden, out of nowhere, somebody began trying to open my front door. I jumped up and grabbed my phone again. I looked out the front window and saw the man was standing by my door. I moved away from the window and called the police. I tried to make sure all my doors were locked and everything. I didn't bother trying to communicate with the man in any way. I was told the police were on their way and would be there in just a few minutes. Eventually, I checked the windows again, but the man was already gone. He was no longer at the front door trying to get in. I went around to every window without seeing him. The police got there a short time later, and I figured the guy must have gotten away. I told them his description, and they offered to search my property. To my surprise and horror, they actually found the man still in my yard. He was hiding out behind my shed. Even more of a surprise, it turned out he was a wanted man. He was wanted in connection with an armed robbery in another city, about an hour away. I'm guessing the guy was trying to get out of here, but didn't have a car or any money. That must be why he was trying to hitchhike. I'm not sure how long he was staying in my town, but he sure gave me the creeps. I'm really glad I called the police when I did. A few years back, I worked at a hotel. When I started working, I was working at the front desk during overnight hours. The hotel was pretty average-sized, maybe a bit larger than average. We didn't have any restaurants or bars connected or anything like that, but we did have lots of rooms. I would sit behind the front desk, and most of the time overnights, nothing would ever happen. People would come and go every now and then, but most of those people didn't even need to talk to me. This made my job really easy, and I didn't mind being up all night long. The event that I'm going to tell you about occurred at just after 2 o'clock in the morning one night. I was working behind the front desk. I faced the lobby and elevators. To my left, there was a lounge area and a hallway that led to rooms on the first floor. Everything was very quiet until a man entered the hotel. He walked inside and went right past me. I assumed that he was staying there and was just returning to his room. The guy was pretty average height, light brown hair, mid-30s or so. He walked down the hallway and was gone. About 5 minutes later, though, he walked by again, this time going to the other hallway. I still didn't really think anything of it. I soon saw him another time, though. He was once again walking past from one hallway to another. It was sort of behind me, but in plain sight still. It seemed a little bit odd. There was nothing wrong with it per se, but it was giving me a strange feeling. Several minutes later, I went to go get some water. There was a dispenser in the lounge, and you had to walk past the hallway to get there. As I was passing by, I noticed someone in the hallway a ways down. I looked over and noticed it was the same guy. He was standing outside of a door, and it appeared as though he couldn't get inside, but was trying to. I thought maybe he was locked out of his own room, or possibly even trying to get into someone else's. I started to walk over to him and was going to ask him if he needed help with something. When I got a few steps closer to him, he stopped and looked over to me. Before I could say anything, the guy turned and walked away in the other direction. Then he disappeared around a corner. It was really suspicious. I started to figure that the guy didn't even have a room here probably. I went back over to my front desk and decided to look at the security monitors. We had cameras in every single hallway. Unfortunately, the video quality was honestly quite bad. Any details were hard to make out. I looked around until I spotted the guy on one of the cameras. He walked past it down a hallway, then went to a random door and tried to open it. It looked like he was possibly knocking on the door as well. He stood at it for a while, then paced around a little before returning to the door. It was too suspicious. I decided to confront the man and ask him what was going on. I got up and walked over to where the guy was. The hallways could get a little complicated on the first floor. The second and third floors were very simple, but the first had more interconnecting hallways. I walked to the one the man was at. When I reached the beginning of the hallway, I saw him a ways down, about 100 feet or so. Almost as soon as I was within sight of him, his eyes snapped to me. I asked the man what he was doing. All of a sudden, he just started sprinting toward me. He appeared to be running as fast as he possibly could. This certainly wasn't the reaction I was expecting. I moved back and started heading toward the front. The man was still chasing after me and quickly approaching me. By the time I got to the lobby, he was a lot closer. I could hear him still running. I decided to run out of the hotel and see if the man would still follow me. I made it outside and realized that he was still chasing me. He was also a lot closer now than I expected. I didn't think I would be able to get to my car on time if he kept chasing me at this speed, so I ran across the street instead. A little ways down was a 24-hour gas station, so I ran all the way there and jumped inside. When I arrived, the guy hadn't quite crossed the street yet and stayed in the hotel parking lot. I think he went back inside after that. I called the police. I reported a suspicious man trying to enter various hotel rooms and chasing after me when I confronted him. The police were very quick to respond. They got there only a minute later. They entered the hotel, which the man was obviously still inside of. He tried to run away, but was quickly caught and removed from the premises. He wouldn't say what he was doing there, nor why he was trying to get inside these various rooms. After that, I talked with the police for a while, then returned to work. I was really creeped out by the whole situation, but grateful to be all right. That was an experience that really made me want to stop working overnight shifts, and I did shortly after. This happened a few years ago. During this time, I was 20 years old. I was in college going to my senior year and back home living with my parents for the summer. I was on a dating app and met a girl named Riley. I think it was Bumble, but anyways, Riley and I talked for a little bit on there. Eventually, after a few hours of chatting back and forth, I got her Snapchat and we started snapping each other. I really preferred text overall, but Riley seemed cool, if a bit slightly odd. Some of the responses she gave or things she said were a little bit unusual. I can't really remember a specific example, but I just remember thinking that as I continued to talk to her. I exchanged snaps with her and continued conversations because I was curious. I wanted to get to know her a little bit more. I was also bored and figured, what's the worst that could happen? After 2 days of snapping her, we were quite friendly with each other, but had made no plans to hang out or anything. I wasn't really planning to either. We weren't snapping each other back and forth every minute or anything, just here and there. Well, it got to the point where we were just sending blank pictures of our faces to each other. I remember that night I went to get some food and hang out with one of my friends, Jordan. I went over to his house. It was not that far away from mine. I arrived back home at around 10 p.m. When I went into my bedroom, I received a snap from Riley once more, as well as a few other people. I then went to bed soon after. In the middle of the night, I remember being woken up. The first thing I remember was feeling really groggy and reaching for my phone at my bedside. I looked at it to see it was almost 3 o'clock in the morning. At that point, something caught my eye. I looked over to the window and saw that somebody appeared to be out there staring in at me. I freaked out and jumped back. As I looked a bit closer and my eyes started to adjust, I saw it appeared to be Riley, the very same girl I'd been snapping with and had met on Bumble. I was so confused. I thought I had to be dreaming at first, but no, I was wide awake. I just looked at her in horror. She appeared to be just staring at me. It was hard to tell because the lights were all off, and it was very dark outside. I couldn't see the expression on her face or anything. I got my phone and went on Snapchat, I guess to tell her to go away from my window. I clicked on her profile, and it said on the Snap map that she was right next to me. That's when I realized she really was there, and this must be how she got my location. I quickly sent her a message. "Why are you staring into my bedroom window? It's creepy." The message was delivered. I took a screenshot of her next to me on the Snap map. Seconds after I sent that, she moved out of sight from the window. About 2 or 3 minutes after that, she opened my message, but didn't reply. I got up and looked out the window, but I didn't see her anymore. She had gone around the other side of the house. I left my bedroom and walked around, looking out of the other windows. I couldn't find her at all anymore. Maybe she had actually left. I went back to my bedroom and looked at Snapchat again. Not only did she not respond to me, but now I was also blocked. I was so weirded out by this. I hoped this meant she would leave me alone, and thankfully she did after that. I never saw or heard from her again. Her profile was also gone from Bumble as well. I still have so many questions. Why did she do that? What was she wanting to do? I still have that screenshot from Snapchat, and I'll never forget how creepy it was to see her at the window that night. This is a story of when I met a guy on Tinder several years ago. I matched with this guy named Mike. He had dark hair, a slight beard, and in his pictures seemed quite decent looking. There was not a whole lot of information about him on his profile, but after we matched, he sent me a message. He said hi, and I said hi back. We began chatting, with me saying very basic things like, "How are you? What's up with things?" Eventually, the conversation did improve a little bit though. Based on his profile, he seemed to be a bit of an outdoorsman of some sort. We continued to talk, and he seemed to be pretty nice. After talking with him on and off for several days, he asked to go on a date with me. I asked him what he had in mind, and he suggested a local restaurant nearby. I decided to agree. We were supposed to meet there the following night at 7 p.m. The next day, I chatted with him early on and made sure we were still on for that night, which we were. I got ready, and when the time came, I drove over to the restaurant early. It was only about 10 minutes from my house and seemed like a pretty cute place. I had actually never eaten here before. There was a decent amount of other people inside. It was around 6:50 p.m., so I wasn't sure if Mike was there yet or not. I looked on Tinder, and he hadn't said anything since I'd told him I was leaving. After waiting in my car until around 7 p.m. with no further contact from him, I decided to enter the restaurant myself. Maybe he was already inside waiting for me, or maybe he was still driving. I went inside and got a table and told the waiter I was waiting for someone. I then sent a message to Mike, saying I was inside and had reserved a table for us. Several minutes went by, and he didn't respond still. I was beginning to get a little bit frustrated. Soon it was 7:15. I messaged him again, asking what was going on. He didn't respond to that either. I stayed there until 7:30, and then left the restaurant. I went out to my car and went to drive home. I was very frustrated, obviously, but there wasn't much I could do. As I began to drive back, though, I noticed about halfway through that a car was now behind me and had stuck with me for quite a while. I didn't really remember it leaving the restaurant with me, though. I did remember it being on the first road down, and whenever I went to turn, it would follow with me. After the next turn, it was still there. I didn't really think the person was following me until I made it all the way to my own street, when the car made that same turn as well. I began to get a very bad feeling. My street is residential and generally very quiet. Typically, not a lot of people drive down it at night. When the car turned in, it really raised my eyebrows. I went to my house, which was the fourth one down on the left side. I pulled into the driveway. The car kept going very slowly, but did keep going past my house. I parked and got out, then watched that car. As I went inside, it crept down the street very slowly. I never got a good look at who was driving though, because it was so dark out. I'm not going to lie, the thought of it being Mike immediately crossed my mind. I quickly pushed that thought away as being too crazy though. I looked on Tinder when I got back inside. Mike still hadn't said anything. I sent him one more message saying something like, "What happened? Why didn't you show up?" I decided I should just move on. It's not like I really knew Mike that well anyway. I was just really annoyed he'd made the date and then failed to show up entirely. I made some pasta for myself and went into the living room. I lived alone at the time and was eating in my living room when I noticed what appeared to be the same car driving by once again. Now, this was like 30 minutes later at least. The car was going the other way down the street, but when it got to the front of my house, it stopped and pulled over to the side of the road. I kept watching from the window very carefully so that I wasn't visible to whoever was in the car. It was definitely the same car that had followed me. The engine was running for a while, then it turned off. I didn't hesitate. I called the police right there. I told them I had been followed home by someone, and now they were parked out front of my house. I kept my eyes on the car. Nobody was getting out of it. I still had no clue who was driving either. After speaking with 911, I kept watching out the window and waited to see what would happen. The car just remained there. Nobody got out and all of the lights were off. There was just a dim streetlight in the nearby area. For the next 10 minutes, nothing changed. I saw a police car start to drive down my street. It got near the car that was parked out front of my house, and then the police car turned on its lights. The officer got out and talked to the driver. I kept watching as he spoke with the guy for 5 minutes. Finally, the car drove away. The officer came up to my front door and spoke with me. He said the driver had claimed to be lost and had pulled over to look up some directions. Said he didn't follow me home. I knew that was a lie. I pulled up Mike's Tinder profile and clicked on a picture of him. I asked him if he looked like that guy by chance. The officer said yes. It was one and the same. I couldn't believe it. Mike had actually followed me home. I spoke with the officer about it, but he said not much could be done unless he returned or something else happened. The officer told me he asked Mike to leave but didn't force him, and Mike said he would not come back. He said that if Mike did try to come back, to give him a call. After that, the officer left. I was a little worried Mike would return. but he didn't. It still creeped me out though. I blocked Mike on Tinder after that. I still can't believe that instead of just trying to date me normally, he followed me home after skipping out on me. I'm glad that since that night I've never heard from him or seen him again. This is a story that pops up back in my mind from time to time. I've only told it to a few people, but I feel it definitely deserves to be shared. It's for sure one of the scariest moments I ever had as a child. Back when I was around 10 years old, my mom finally decided it was time for her to start taking her driver's tests. When she began taking her lesson, she was really struggling a lot. For that reason, my dad decided that he wanted to do some practice with her, besides the official driving lessons with her instructor. He wanted to make sure she'd pass on the first try. My brother and I were attending swimming lessons at a nearby university at the time. Behind a forested area near the university lays this huge student parking area surrounded by trees. It was basically empty every weekend. My dad saw the opportunity to take my mom there and drive around for a bit for practice. They brought my little brother and I with them too, since we were obviously too young to stay home alone. We brought a football with us so we could do something while they were practicing. When we arrived to the parking lot later on in the evening, my parents began to practice their driving. My brother and I quickly got bored and asked if we could go over to a little grassy field on the side of the lot to play some football together. My parents let us since they'd always be able to keep their eyes on us whilst driving around. After playing for some time, my parents ended up driving to the other end of the parking lot. They were about 300 to 400 meters away from my brother and I. All of a sudden, a white Toyota pulled into the parking lot as well. We were playing right at the exit/entrance. The car turned around and stopped on my right side, with the vehicle facing the exit. The driver rolled down his windows and presented himself as Thomas. He looked friendly, was good-looking, and young. I would guess around 30 years old. This is where things started to get weird, though. On the passenger seat was a woman covering her face with a newspaper. All I could see was long blonde hair. On the back seat was a baby sat in a baby chair. Thomas immediately stated he was with the police and that we had to get in the car right away, as he had to speak with us about something important. My brother actually took 2 steps toward the vehicle, but I stuck my arm out in front of him, sensing that something was off here. The woman was just covering her face, not saying a single word. Thomas began to raise his voice and told us once again to get in the car or he'd have to come out and punish us. My brother and I froze in fear. Suddenly, the woman put down the newspaper. She showed her face and told us in the most calm, motherly voice possible, "Just listen to the man." The woman was young and pretty. She looked like a person who wouldn't hurt a fly. At that moment, I began screaming as loud as I could. What we hadn't seen at that point yet was that my dad was already running as fast as he could towards us. He was coming from behind the vehicle, so we hadn't seen him. My parents didn't have the time to drive to us since the road down the parking lot was twisted. My dad started yelling as loud as he could, "Hey, who the fuck are you? Get away from my children!" As soon as Thomas heard my dad and realized my brother and I were not alone, he threw his car into gear and shot off like a rocket. He most definitely looked like a person who shat himself when he saw my dad. My dad was furious and told my brother and I to hurry up back to the car. He didn't even think about calling the police at that point. He wanted to beat the guy to death himself. That resulted in us driving around for the next hour, trying to find the man. Eventually, my dad did cool down though, and decided he should probably just call the police. We never found out who those people were, but the episode taught me to never judge a book by its cover. People can be the most friendly-looking people on Earth and still wish evil upon you or the ones you love. I'm not sure what those people would have done to us. I am sure about one thing though. They definitely were not with the police. This is a quick little story that happened to my husband and I 3 years ago. It was around the time we got married. We're both unconventional people who like to do things out of the norm. We both have strange jobs, strange hobbies, and very strange personalities. It's what I was attracted to initially when I met Jake. I felt like they didn't make people like him and I often these days, and when we found each other, we didn't want to let go. But that's enough with the sappy stuff. After 2 years of dating, we knew we wanted to get married and start a family together. Jake popped the question, and of course I said yes. Since we both had quite small extended families, we thought it would be a good idea to have a smaller ceremony and keep the budget tight. Weddings cost an ungodly amount of money usually, and we could save a bit with this for our new life together. My family was okay with that, but Jake's family was a little bit skeptical. What did we mean by a smaller, unconventional wedding? Specifically, Jake's mom, who was very religious, had a problem with this. I know she practices some form of Christianity, but I'm not sure exactly which denomination. During the entire planning stages of the wedding, his mom kept pushing for the pastor or preacher or whatever it's called to be a big part of it. I was against this 100%, and so was Jake. He already had someone planned. His mom didn't love the idea of my gay best friend Paul being the one to officiate the marriage. She didn't say it outright, but it was written all over her face. A few weeks before the wedding, Jake and I went to his parents' house for dinner. We were expecting a nice, quiet evening, with maybe a pasta dinner or something. His family was very persistent that after dinner we have some coffee and dessert. Right before his dad brought out the coffee, the doorbell rang, and Jake's mom ran to the door all excited. We could hear her bubbly voice greeting and talking to someone. I had no idea who that someone was, but I could tell from Jake's expression it wasn't someone good. I whispered to him and asked, "Who is it?" He just quietly said, "Just be cool, I'll handle it." A million ideas were swirling through my head as to who this could possibly be. Finally, they walked back into the dining room, and his mom was grinning like the Joker ear to ear. She was accompanied by a large man with a big red beard. He was bald on top, and all the rest of his hair was this really fiery red. "Wow, Jake, look at you, bud. Last time I saw you, you were about 5'3". Now you're a big old guy, huh?" He laughed at his own attempt of a joke, like he just heard the funniest thing of all time. They all made small talk for a moment, and then finally Jake introduced us. "This is my fiancée, Tabby. Tabby, this is Minister Mark." My eyes felt like they were going to explode as I shook this man's hand. I couldn't believe his parents had done this. I didn't say anything though. They continued to talk for a while, and things really started to get ugly. They started on their mission for us to reconsider and get the minister to marry us in their church. Jake was now livid and kept telling them we already made our plans for the wedding. This wasn't going to happen for various reasons, including the budget. We wanted things to be small and untraditional. I saw the minister make a strange face, and then he asked what untraditional meant. I couldn't sit quietly anymore. I spoke up in an annoyed voice. "It means not traditional. I'm not gonna wear a white dress or anything like that. He'll see me before the wedding. We don't believe in any of these superstitions, and we're not getting married in the church either. We're not paying for some fancy banquet hall." The room was quiet, and the minister seemed to be getting very angry. His face was turning bright red. Jake tried to be the voice of reason and interjected. He rationally explained what I meant, even though I meant exactly what I said. Eventually, we all left and went on our own ways. I was furious with his mom, but I understood how she was, and I tried to deal with it. This is where people tell me that I'm crazy and this might be unrelated, but I know what I saw that night. We were in bed together and were about to fall asleep. It was not long before I heard a loud crash. We both jumped together and made our way down the hall. We saw that the side door had been bashed open. It was a calm night, so we knew it wasn't the wind or anything like that. That wouldn't have explained a loud bang either. We crept around the house and saw no evidence of a break-in other than that door. Just as we were about to head back to the bedroom, I noticed Jake standing still as a statue in the kitchen. I looked over, and he motioned for me to run back to the bedroom. I didn't, but I did stand back. He grabbed one of his golf clubs that were right by the side of the door and started to tiptoe towards it. There was a moment of silence before heavy footsteps ran up from the basement. We both yelled in surprise. Jake froze for a moment. The shock of seeing a person emerge from your basement would probably paralyze anyone in the moment. The footsteps ran directly toward the side door, where we saw a large man wearing a baseball cap over his face unlocking it. Jake finally snapped and swung his club like a baseball bat. The person grunted and the hat fell off his face. As the man ran out into the night, I looked out the window. I swore it was that minister, Mark. I told Jake I thought it was him, but he didn't believe me, claiming there was no way he was capable of something like that. He did admit the body type looked like him, but he couldn't be sure his hair was actually red in the dark. He did say he didn't get a good look, though. We reported this incident, and apparently the cops checked out the minister and his story checked out. I know what I saw, though. The more I thought about it, the more convinced I became it was that minister. I don't know what he intended by breaking into our home. Maybe it was to scare us into doing things their way. I really don't know. I was furious for weeks, though. Since my parents had a big house, I begged Jake to stay there with me for a few days, until this all passed by. We eventually got married the way we intended, and his parents never brought up the minister again after. We also never saw him again, and never had another break-in like that. We're still in the same house as well. Maybe it was just some random break-in, and my brain chose to see what it wanted to see. But I know deep down, I saw his red hair running away. The reason I'm just now sharing this story is because 3 years later, out of the blue, my husband just said, "You know what? I think I did see his red beard that night. I think it was Minister Mark." I can't believe this story is over 10 years old now. Time really does fly if you're not careful. This story is probably one of the weirdest things that's ever happened to me, and at the time it was incredibly scary as well. I had recently started dating my girlfriend, and due to our conflicting schedules, I rarely got to see her. As a young man in my 20s during the events of this story, I really wanted to see her more than anything. I wanted to spend so much time with her. Unfortunately, it just seemed like there was never a chance for us to be alone. I lived at home with my parents, and so did she. So alone time wasn't really something we had much of. We'd only been dating for a short while, and I was already getting pretty annoyed. It seemed like she always had something going on every night or weekend, and I honestly felt like a bit of an afterthought to her. One weekend, I told her how I was feeling. She responded by telling me she had planned a camping trip with her friends, and she was really sorry we couldn't hang out yet again. I was pretty mad, I'm not gonna lie. At this point, I was close to ending things with her before they had the chance to progress any further. The day she was leaving for the trip, she texted me out of the blue. "Sorry, I know this is last minute, but my friend said you could come if you wanted to meet us here. I absolutely hate camping, but I was not going to miss this opportunity to spend time with my girlfriend." And the campsite was only about 40 minutes from my house, so I packed up my bag and headed out there. This was a weird place. It wasn't like camping in the middle of the woods. It was sort of a wooded area, but the campsite itself was a big giant clearing that had dozens of other people camping out there. It didn't seem very private, and it certainly didn't feel like camping, not to me at least. Once I got there, I met all her friends for the first time. They all seemed like pretty great people, and I was kind of excited to hang out with all of them. They were the opposite of my girlfriend, though. She was very quiet and reserved all the time, and her friends were all very outgoing and loud. They all had an awesome sense of humor as well. While we were all hanging out and having fun, I noticed a bunch of trails in the woods. I decided to walk a bit out of curiosity, and once I started doing so, I realized just how big this place really was. It finally started to feel a bit more like what I thought of when I thought of camping. Earlier that night, we had grilled some food on the portable grill and played some cards together. Once the sun set, we drank some beers we'd stored in special containers, since we weren't allowed to have alcohol. Around 11 p.m., 2 people came over to our little section of tents. I don't know if we should call them park rangers or what, but they were basically in charge of the campsite and the surrounding trails. They shined flashlights in our area very aggressively and yelled at us, demanding to know why we were still awake. We all laughed and looked at each other very confused. One of the guys who was there in this sort of arrogant voice said, "Why wouldn't we be awake? It's our vacation. We're planning on staying awake for a while and hanging out, you know?" One of the rangers became angry immediately and jumped down his throat. "There's a strict 10 o'clock curfew. All lights out now." We all just laughed, thinking it was some sort of weird joke. Her one friend, the same one who'd spoken up before, said, "I paid all this money for this campsite, man. If you're literally gonna make me go to sleep earlier, why don't you just get out of here?" I don't know if I would have had the same response exactly, but we all felt the same way. The woman of the pair basically screamed at us like we were children. Frustrated, we all started making our way back into our tents. One of the group of friends said, "It's okay, guys. Let's just meet in my tent and play some cards. We can keep quiet." The ranger must have heard her, because she turned around and got right back in her face. "I said lights out. That means lights out. No cards, no talking. It's time for bed. I'll be making rounds again soon, and if you guys are still awake, you're in big trouble." This was weird and really ridiculous. I felt like some kind of kid. I couldn't believe these people were making grown adults go to sleep like this was a prison camp or something. Once she walked away, everyone I was with was stewing with anger. We were behaving like she wanted, though, mainly because we had been drinking, and if she wanted to kick us out, we would be screwed. None of us were okay to operate a vehicle. It wasn't long until everyone basically fell asleep, except for me and my girlfriend. We were enjoying our time together when she suggested something I couldn't believe. She said we should sneak out onto one of the trails so we could have some true alone time. As I said before, I was a young man in my early 20s, so that was all I needed to hear. We quietly slipped out of the tent and made our way over to one of the nearby trails. Once we were a good distance from the start of it, we really started to enjoy our alone time. The enjoyment ended suddenly, though, when we heard a man call out, "Hey!" We both froze, trying not to bring attention to ourselves. We were sure it was another park ranger. We thought it was best to just stay still when the deep voice spoke up again. "I know you're there. I just want to say hi." We both looked at each other confused. What was that supposed to mean? I started to peek around one of the trees. Even though it was nearly pitch black, I could see that standing on the path with this little flashlight was a strange-looking man. He was short and kind of wearing an oversized white t-shirt. He made eye contact with me and saw me instantly. He stood up straight and smiled. Hey buddy, I got something for you." The situation was weird. I felt tense being in the woods with this strange man. I didn't respond because I had no idea what to say. He then said one of the most convoluted things I'd ever heard. "I got all this money in my pocket. My ex-wife is gonna take it from me, so I want to give it away before she finds out. Hey, you want to come over here and grab it? Would ya?" He held out his hand, but it had nothing in it. He was about 20 feet away, so thankfully we weren't right on top of each other or anything. I looked at my girlfriend and mouthed the words "run" to her. As soon as she started to flee, I followed closely behind her. As I went to take off, I looked at the guy, who shouted something like, "No!" He then briefly lunged in my direction. I was already sprinting away before he could even commit, though. We ran as fast as we could out of the woods. I couldn't really tell if we were being followed or not. Once we got back to the camp, we waited about an hour for the rangers to make a walkthrough. I grabbed the lady from before and told her that some man was skulking about in the woods. I lied and told her I could see him from inside the tent. Luckily, she believed me. They notified the authorities, and that's the last I saw of that creepy man in the woods. The rest of the night, my eyes were just glued in the direction of those trails, waiting to catch another glimpse of that stranger. Thank God I never did. I have no idea what he really wanted that night, but the look of sheer desperation and rage in his eyes when we darted away from his grasp was something I'll never forget. Every year around this time, when people start camping out a lot, I'm reminded of that encounter in the woods. I'm just thankful we were far enough away to be able to get away from him safely. Having a gross and unprofessional manager in the food service industry is probably as bad as it can get, and when I tell you this story, you'll probably understand why. I was a 16-year-old girl and had been working at a restaurant for around 6 months or so. I got my work permit at 15 and a half and had been working there ever since then. My first manager had been great. She was sweet, very understanding. It really made work a breeze. She ended up moving and had to quit, though. I was hoping the assistant manager would take over her position, but that would have been too easy. Instead, they hired a guy none of us knew and had never worked in the restaurant to begin with. We were confused why this guy of all people had been chosen, but whatever. Maybe he would be just as nice. He showed up on his first day in clothes covered in stains and torn in various places. Honestly, I thought he was a random homeless guy coming in when I first saw him. He went into his office and thankfully got changed, but even changing clothes can't hide the stench of someone who clearly hadn't showered in days. His behavior made himself seem normal at first, at least when it came to how he interacted with us. Mostly he would just spend a lot of time in his office and would only really come out when there was a complaint from a customer. I was fine with that, though. He kind of gave me the creeps for some reason, so having him not around as much made me feel a little bit better. After a few months of him being the manager, he started coming out of the office more and more, and that's when he started showing his true colors. He tried to hit on every woman who stepped inside, and whenever they inevitably rejected him, he would always insult them the second they left. He'd go on and on about it for the rest of the day, too. He'd always talk about how he couldn't believe any woman would give up the opportunity to be with a man like him. All of the younger women there tried to keep our heads down, but it didn't work for long. He eventually switched from hitting on customers to hitting on us. It didn't even matter that most of us were underaged. He would ask us what kind of underwear we were wearing, and when he was called out for being creepy and a pervert, he'd yell at us for thinking he was serious and say that we were the ones being creepy for taking it like that. That's how it started, at least. Eventually, he got very comfortable with it being obvious he was serious. Unfortunately, one of my coworkers didn't exactly help the situation by actually sleeping with him the second she turned 18. Their relationship didn't end well. His wife came in and yelled at her for doing that with her husband. She harassed her all day, and the girl quit later that day. I never saw her or heard from her again, probably embarrassed by the whole thing. Unfortunately, that event made things even worse. It made him think he was the most desirable guy on earth, and that all the female employees must secretly want him. He'd stand really close to me, whisper in my ear the creepy things he wanted to do to me. One day, it was so bad, I actually thought I was going to throw up from all the things he was saying. When none of us would respond positively to his advances, he went back to hitting on any female customer that walked in. He was threatened by one because he tried to make a move on a 12-year-old girl. I'm not even joking. He hadn't realized it was her father standing behind her. He tried to claim that he didn't realize she looked so young. But I'll say she 1,000,000,000% looked like a little chick. It probably was the most disturbing thing I witnessed from this guy. We got many bad reviews from him on Google and Yelp and various websites, all from women who said he was gross and creepy. Upper management spoke to him about it, but from what I overheard through his office door, they just told him to be more careful about disguising it, not to stop at all. I was disgusted by their inability to be serious about these concerns. That's just how the world works, I get. I spent weeks watching him touch my female coworker, Leslie. It was very recognizable as harassment. He was reported multiple times, and of course, nothing was done. I always said something when I saw it happening. She actually went to the police about it, but they said there was no proof. As much as they said they wanted to help us, they just didn't. The girl ended up quitting, and on her way out, she urged the rest of us to as well. The only reason I hadn't yet was because I was saving up for a car. I was so close to hitting my goal. I really only needed to work for another couple of weeks. Unfortunately, then he set his sights on me. Every shift I had with him, I had to put up with him grabbing me in various places, slapping my butt and making disgusting advances on me. It made me feel awful and ashamed of myself. I left work every day and cried on the walk home. He continued to do this for the last few weeks I worked there. I didn't tell my parents because I just wanted to make money, and I knew they'd make a big deal out of it. Finally, the day came to quit. I was nervous and excited at the same time. I walked over to his office door. Through the window, I could see an air mattress inside. I knocked and he answered in only his underwear. I was grossed out, but it wasn't a huge shocker, considering the person this guy was. I asked about the air mattress. He said his wife had kicked him out, and he'd been living there the past month. I told him I was quitting. His only response was that at least he could now be with me, because he was no longer my boss. He tried to grab me. I kid you not, I built up the courage and slapped him in the face as hard as I could. My other coworkers saw that, and started laughing at him. He said he was going to call the police, but I just told him they wouldn't do anything. He had no evidence. He turned to the other employees and said he had witnesses, but they all denied seeing anything. I turned around and walked out, and never went back there again. I heard years later he was arrested for forcing himself on a woman. She had DNA evidence on her side this time. I was grateful for her being brave enough to say something. I knew she was saving other women from suffering at the hands of that man. My mom had warned me not to work at a bar, but they were hiring and I just turned 21. The thought of working around alcohol all day seemed fun to me. It was also a restaurant at night as well, so I didn't really think it would be as sketchy as a normal bar. She just kept insisting that it would be. My first few months working there were great. We'd have the occasional bar fight or something, but it wasn't anything we needed to be too concerned about. just drunk people doing what they do. And that was before this woman started coming in every night. She was obviously high on something and constantly just wanted to start trouble. She'd pick fights with other women, try to harass men that clearly wanted nothing to do with her. She got beat up so severely one night that when I found her outside, I actually thought she was dead. I called an ambulance for her, and they took her to the hospital. I didn't know what happened to her after that until around 3 weeks later. She came into the bar again, only this time she was not drunk or high. She thanked me for saving her life. She said me caring about her enough to get her help made her rethink her life choices, and she was getting better now. Honestly, I felt very happy for the woman. That is, until she told me she was so delighted I was in love with her. I didn't even know what to say. I definitely was not in love with her. I had no idea how she could have gotten that impression. Sure enough, though, she did. I was kind of concerned about it. I didn't know if this girl was dangerous or what. I tried to be as nice and sensitive as possible. I told her I was not in love with her and helped her out because she obviously didn't deserve to just die on the street. Her face instantly went from happy to extremely angry. She started screaming at me. Why was I lying? I just didn't want to profess my love for her in front of everyone else. In front of this bar, I was getting embarrassed since everyone in the place had actually started to stare. I asked her to calm down, but she seemed to be having some sort of freak out. It was like she was a little kid. She said she'd only stopped if I admitted I loved her. So against my better judgment, I did just that. I muttered out a quiet, "I love you," and said that she needed to leave before I changed my mind. That seemed to settle her down at least a little bit. She was really happy with my quote-unquote confession. She giggled like a little girl and said that she'd see me later. She ran out of the bar. I breathed a sigh of relief when the door closed behind her. Everyone in the bar started to actually laugh at me, and eventually I joined in as well. What happened really was somewhat comical. Part of me was very concerned for the future, though. What would I do if she came back? What if she did the same thing the next day? I asked my girlfriend to meet me at the bar that night because she was going to be spending the night at my place. It was just after 2 a.m. My girlfriend walked into the bar, and I made my way over to her. I put my arm around her shoulders, and she had hers around my waist. We exited the building. Unfortunately, something that neither of us could have ever expected to happen was that the woman who had made me confess my love earlier had decided to wait outside the bar for me that entire time. When she saw me with my girlfriend, she was furious. She started screaming that I was cheating on her and was asking how I could do that to the woman I loved. My girlfriend was obviously confused. I told her this woman was crazy. She didn't seem to like that at all. She screamed that if I thought she was crazy, she'd show me how crazy she could actually be. I thought she was going to pull out a knife and try to kill my girlfriend or something. Instead, she just walked away down the road until we couldn't see her anymore. My girlfriend just laughed a little bit, but I could tell she was uncomfortable with what just happened. I told her everything would be okay. This lady was probably just trying to scare us. Unfortunately, she had succeeded. The next week, the woman continued to come into the bar and would sit in my section as she tried to flirt with me all day long. I refused and ignored her advances, but it never deterred her at all. She'd wait outside for me all day to leave and follow me to my car. I was finally over it when she grabbed my butt as I was unlocking my car door. In my mind, that justified pushing her off me. She fell to the ground when I did so. She looked shocked and confused, but I didn't care. I just yelled at her to leave me alone, and I'd call the cops if she ever stepped foot on the property again. I got in my car and drove away. She just laid there on the ground with a dazed expression on her face. I didn't realize doing that would cause the problems it did, but you really can't predict what will happen with a druggie, especially when you make them mad. A few days after that happened, my girlfriend said she'd started seeing that woman all around town. It was starting to freak her out. She felt like she was following her on purpose. She was worried this lady would physically hurt her. I told her she was most likely harmless, but if she wanted, she could stay with me for a while. I'd go out with her whenever she needed. She agreed. Every day at work, she'd meet me at the bar. We'd drive to my place and do everything together practically. And you know what? I did start to notice the woman everywhere we went as well. I didn't like the feeling we were being followed by her. I also didn't really feel like another confrontation would be the right decision. It only became a real issue when we were leaving a store around 8 p.m. It was dark outside. She was waiting for us at my car. My girlfriend was at the passenger side door when I heard her grunt and fall over. I saw the woman behind her smiling this insane smile. I ran around to the other side and yelled at her to get away. It was then that I noticed she was holding a knife that now had blood on it. My girlfriend was screaming she'd been stabbed. I did what I could to protect her and tried to prevent her from being attacked again. I jumped at the woman who had just stabbed the love of my life. I took her to the ground and started pounding her face into the pavement. I grabbed the knife from her hand and threw it away from us. The woman was begging for me to stop, saying she loved me over and over. At that point, I didn't care though. I got up from the ground and stomped on her stomach as hard as I could to make sure she wasn't going to get up and attack my girlfriend again. I saw blood flowing from her shirt. She was starting to get weak. I pulled out my phone and called 911. Officers arrived before the ambulance did, but they were able to help me control the bleeding at least a little. They arrested the woman, who continued to insist she loved me, even as they slapped her in the back of the patrol car. I asked what was going to happen to the woman. They said they were going to take her to the hospital, since I'd beaten her so badly. An ambulance arrived shortly after my girlfriend started to lose consciousness. She had lost a lot of blood and needed help ASAP. I met the ambulance at the nearest hospital that had a trauma center. She was taken directly into surgery. You see, the woman had nicked her abdominal aorta, which caused massive internal and external bleeding. The only reason she survived was because the aorta hadn't burst. The trauma team at the hospital was ready to receive her before she even showed up. The woman was charged with first-degree attempted murder and given life in prison with the possibility of parole after 20 years. I was happy with the sentencing. I was even happier my girlfriend was able to make a full recovery. All in all, it wasn't my smartest idea to work at that bar. It wasn't intentional to make this crazy woman fall in love with me. But honestly, who could have predicted a simple act would make someone become so obsessed with me? There's a reason why I have to be talked into camping every time it comes up in conversation with either friends or family. I don't mind the outdoors and I don't mind nature either. I just feel like I want to sleep in a bed and not on the ground in a tent or something. This specific year, my boyfriend talked me into going camping with him, but this time we would be staying in a cabin. At least I could still sleep on a bed. I'd voted for the ocean myself, but hey, compromises are required in a relationship. The trip consisted of me, my boyfriend, and 2 other couples. The 6 of us found a nice cabin in the woods that was mostly secluded and was only about a 100-yard walk to this beautiful lake. It was swimmable as well. I didn't want to admit it, but I was actually feeling this trip quite a bit, especially once we arrived. The first day was amazing. We spent all day walking some trails, swimming in the lake. In the early evening, we decided to cook up some steaks on the grill. It was a great first day. That night, we all went inside and went to bed. At around midnight or so, if I had to guess, I wasn't sleeping very well. I thought I could hear something outside all night long. I had been chalking it up to my imagination, though. After all, we were in the woods, so hearing strange noises at night was not all that weird. The next morning, we were all outside getting ready for another nice hike when we heard this chipper voice call out from behind us. "Why, hello there! How y'all doing?" My boyfriend, being the always social butterfly he is, started talking to this random guy who had appeared right away. He told us his name was Wayne, and he was an expert in all the trails around here. Something about the whole interaction was just slightly strange, but I suppose it wasn't too alarming. He said he lived nearby. He was hiking some trails and overheard us talking. He wanted to make sure we were settling in okay. I thought it was kind of sweet of him to check in with us. He was a bigger guy, I would say well over 6 feet tall. He had a pretty big gut and had a backpack on, with hiking boots and jeans. He really looked like a guy who would know his stuff, a typical hiking local. We thanked him and he laughed in his jolly voice and went on his way. As we hiked, we laughed and talked about Wayne for a little while. When the afternoon came, we all decided to go to the lake for a swim. When we got down there, we were sitting on the dock soaking up the sun, when from beyond the tree line we heard that voice again. "Hey!" We all jumped back because honestly it scared us. Standing at the edge of the dock now was Wayne once more. We asked what he was doing here. He claimed he was just wandering by and happened to see all of us out there. My boyfriend laughed it off and talked with him for a while, but my friend Tina's boyfriend and I felt uneasy about this entire thing. The entire time they were talking, Wayne just nodded and laughed and kept looking around. After they finished their conversation, he kept mumbling okay under his breath and then walked away. It was really weird but not scary, at least not yet. That night, we were all sitting around the campfire sharing scary stories. I felt even more uncomfortable for some reason. All of a sudden, Wayne jumped out of the bushes without any warning and yelled in a sort of joking voice, "Here I am!" It was followed by a loud and excited laugh. We all jumped out of our skin, even worse than at the docks. At this point, even my boyfriend was upset. He kind of yelled at Wayne, telling him to leave us alone and go back home. He explained that scaring us like this wasn't cool. Wayne was lucky none of us had retaliated out of instinct. Wayne looked upset and claimed he was just trying to help us have some memorable experiences on our trip. He left down one of the trails. He seemed to look pretty upset. I almost felt sorry for him until I realized it was almost midnight and there was no reason for him to be wandering around our campsite jumping out of bushes. The experience put a damper on the rest of the night. We ended up calling it a night not long after that, and we went inside and cleaned up the place. We were supposed to be leaving early in the morning. Once in bed, I told my boyfriend I wasn't feeling great about this whole Wayne situation. I had a bad feeling he'd find his way around again. I couldn't stop thinking about that weird noise I'd heard the entire night before. Was it actually from this goofball? That night, I was wide awake again. I'm not sure of the exact time, but at some point during the night, I distinctly heard breathing and footsteps outside the window. I woke up my boyfriend and begged him to check for me. He was annoyed at first, but his tone changed instantly. I saw him look out, and his skin turned as white as a ghost. He told me he could see someone outside, pacing back and forth. He thought it was Wayne. I went to the window and tried not to draw any attention to us. Wayne seemed to be walking back and forth, having an argument with himself. He was talking almost incoherently. He attempted to open the locked door, but when he couldn't, he started pounding his head as if upset with himself. After pacing for a few more minutes, he seemed to just disappear back into the woods. We were horrified. We didn't know what to do. My boyfriend called the owner of the cabin and informed him that we were also calling the police. A cop car showed up a few minutes later, and we explained the entire day's events to the officer, including Wayne's appearances. The cop didn't seem too bothered and simply nodded along. It felt like he was just sort of listening for the sake of listening and didn't grasp the severity of the situation. We packed up our stuff and made some coffee, just stayed awake until dawn. Once the sun was rising, we loaded up the van and headed home. Once we got to the main road, we saw Wayne just walking by himself. He was mumbling, smacking himself in the head from time to time. We did call the dispatcher and tell them we saw Wayne, who'd been trying to break into the cabin earlier, walking down the road. That was the end of it on our side, though. I'm not sure if the cops ever actually picked him up, or if he just fled back into the woods. I wonder if he really did live nearby, or if he was just some strange man wandering around, hoping to cause some harm. I'm happy nothing physical happened to us, but from now on, they can all go camping without me. A couple of years ago, I finally got married to my longtime girlfriend. We had been dating for 2 years, and then engaged for another 4. We both figured it would be wise to finish school and establish our careers before fully tying the knot together. Thankfully, our wedding was beautiful, but it was almost ruined at the last second, and I would be lying if I told you there wasn't a small dark cloud looming over that beautiful day. First off, in order to protect my family, but mostly my wife's side of the family, I'm gonna refrain from using any real names in this story. The family involved has already dealt with enough stuff now, and I don't want to have anyone else getting involved in their personal business. When we first started dating, I met her cousin named Mike. This dude was wild, plain and simple. I enjoyed going out occasionally with Mike because he was what I would call a wild card. He was loud, funny, and didn't care about what he said out loud. When he was around, you knew you were in for something crazy. The older I got, though, the more tired and disillusioned I became with Mike's antics. He seemed perpetually stuck in that early 20s mode, and it was becoming increasingly hard to have him around. Around the time we got engaged, we rarely saw him at all. If it wasn't a family party, we wouldn't see him. We would constantly hear stories from his girlfriend's parents that he was always in some kind of legal trouble. It wasn't your typical criminal stuff, though. Mike thought he was doing what society failed to do. Those were his words, by the way. He would break in and rob extremely wealthy businesses and homes. He even went as far as to jump employees of businesses he knew were well off. He just assumed anyone who worked for anyone rich must be a corrupt person. It was disheartening to witness someone I used to enjoy so much evolve into such a bad person. Fast forward to the engagement party. Mike came, and at first it was nice catching up with him. He had recently been released from a short-term jail sentence and seemed to be getting more things in his life in order. At the party, I introduced Mike to my best man, Nick, and we all chatted for a while about sports or whatever. Nick mentioned that he was a cop at some point, and the expression on Mike's face instantly changed. In front of the entire party, Mike went absolutely crazy. He went on an insane rant about how all the police are corrupt, and Nick should go to prison for the heinous actions of all cops that ever lived. Needless to say, Mike was removed from the party. After that outburst, we all caught our breath a little and had a little laugh. We went back to having a good time. Nick was a cop who truly cared about justice and not babysitting, as he puts it. He disliked giving tickets for no reason and tried to let people go with warnings whenever they could. They'd actually moved from a different state because the laws there were so strict, and he found it hard to separate the justice from the regulation. Unfortunately, Mike viewed every single cop as a horrible and crooked person who could never be saved. Not long after the party, my friends and I went away for the weekend for my bachelor party. It wasn't one of those wild parties you might see in the movies or something. We just went to a cabin in the woods not far from a small town. We went to eat in town and visited one of the local dive bars for a couple drinks. Then we went back to the camp to hang out and play video games and do country stuff all night like we were 12 again. It was my bachelor party, and that's what I wanted to do. Sometime in the middle of the night, at around 12 or 1 a.m., a few of my friends said the motion light had come on out back. I ran over to the sliding door and looked outside. At first, I didn't see anything, but then I noticed 2 wet footprints right outside the back door. Initially, I laughed, thinking one of the guys were playing some sort of prank on me. I was an avid horror fan, so it was something they might do. Everybody denied any involvement, though. We all went outside to investigate. Nick led us around the cabin, and we saw a trail of wet footprints that went from the deck to the grass. Once in the grass, we obviously couldn't see which way they had gone, which was very unnerving. We reported the incident, but as you can imagine, they couldn't really do anything. We had nothing to go on other than wet footprints, and the person had already fled. We decided to stay there and stick it out in the cabin. Every little gust of wind or creak in the house made us jump in surprise. I will say that I felt safe with my friends, but it didn't make it any less unnerving. Around 5 a.m., I was still in the living room, wide awake. I happened to glance over to the sliding door and saw someone peering in through the window. I screamed to alert everyone in the living room, but by the time they'd all woken up, all they could see was the person running off into the woods. And that was the last straw for us. We packed everything up and left. We alerted the cops and the property owner of the situation. It was all just really unfortunate. Once we got back home, it became a wild story that we all kinda got to share with each other. For that reason, I guess it was pretty memorable. We assumed at the time it was just some crazy person who lived in the town. They were trying to scare us or something. We all got together for rehearsal dinner, and after dinner, a few of us gathered for some drinks. Since I'd had a few, Nick was going to drive me home. While we were driving home, we noticed a car following extremely close behind us with its high beams on. Nick tried to maneuver away from the car, but they followed every move he made. At this point, he realized that whoever this was, they were messing with us purposefully. Nick called one of his buddies who was on duty and told him what was going on. He was only about 5 minutes away. I'm not sure why Nick decided to do what he did next, but he pulled over, and the car behind us pulled over as well. Nick stayed in the car and told me to do the same. A person emerged from the car parked behind us and made its way over. They seemed to be wearing a mask. When he reached the driver's side window, he demanded that Nick get out. I was terrified. I hoped Nick's buddy would show up soon. He tried to reason with this masked man, and the man wasn't having any of it. He started banging on the door with some type of object. I was terrified as to what it could be. I just wanted this whole ordeal to end. The masked man broke the window, shattering the glass inside. He grabbed at Nick, trying to drag him out of the car. I think that's what Nick had been waiting for, though. As soon as the man reached in, he kicked open the door, and it knocked the masked man over. Nick kicked whatever he was holding out of his hand. It went flying, and he was able to restrain the masked man on the ground. I saw him screaming and squirming, but Nick kept him detained until his buddy showed up. A minute or two later, the officer quickly detained the man. I felt like I was getting sick as he walked by. He was in handcuffs with the mask removed. As you might have guessed, it was my soon-to-be wife's cousin. After taking care of all the legal stuff that night, I went home and told her everything that happened. She was incredibly embarrassed and thankful I was okay. Apparently, her cousin came clean and admitted he didn't like Nick only because he was a cop. He was quoted as saying, "I wanted to teach him a lesson. All those cops needed to be punished. I was going to do my family a favor and spare them from this monster." Luckily, the family was spared from the only actual monster around. It was a bleak night and a dark morning, but once the wedding fully commenced, the dark clouds seemed to go away, and we had a great wedding. It's crazy to me that monsters aren't always strangers in the shadows, but sometimes your very own blood. So, I'm just now writing this story hours after the most insane moments of my entire life. I know that may seem a bit dramatic, but in the moment it was absolutely insane. My family and I just arrived at our campsite for the week, and I'm on eggshells looking over my shoulder every 2 seconds. Deep down, I'm sure everything will be alright. But bear with me as I try to do my best I can to tell you this story. It just happened and it's my first time recalling it, so things might be a little bit jumbled. Late last night, me and my family left our house to embark on our 1-week camping adventure. Our 2 kids were so excited to finally be able to join my wife and I on one of our adventures. She and I had gone on all sorts over the years, but we wanted to wait until our kids were just a little bit older before involving them as well. Well, the time had finally come for the kiddos to join us, and we set out on the 7-hour drive. A little after midnight, the initial excitement of leaving and the musical concert inside the truck was over. Everyone was asleep except for me. That was fine though, gave me the chance to listen to one of my audiobooks I'd been neglecting for quite some time. I was surprised when we were closer to our destination, and I realized my family had been asleep for almost the entire drive. They would have brief moments of waking up and asking where we were, but mostly they'd stayed out cold for the entire trip. Unfortunately, about 30 minutes until we reached the site, I got the dreaded flat tire that no driver wants to get, especially when on vacation. I was lucky to have my spare, so this was no more than an inconvenience really. I was still really annoyed though. I briefly lost control of the vehicle and slid to the side of the road before I managed to regain it somehow. My family was still asleep to my surprise. I quietly got out of the truck and uncovered the spare tire buried under all our luggage. While preparing to fix the tire, I started to wonder what exactly had hit the tire to render it flat. It seemed to have happened out of nowhere. For some reason, I suddenly felt suspicious. I grabbed the damaged tire and replaced it with a spare. I was just finishing up changing when I heard the light sound of someone clearing their throat. It sounded a lot like my wife, but once I turned around, I was greeted by a relatively small woman with wild-looking dreadlocks and a tattoo that rose up from the middle of her neck. I said hello in a tentative and confused voice. The woman smiled and seemed to be putting on a fake delicate voice. "Hi, I'm Summer. You look like you could use some help there." I just smiled and said, "Thanks, but I think we'll be okay." I was trying to be polite, but I was really suspicious about this whole situation. The woman kept looking off to the side of the road, like she was trying to communicate with someone. When I looked over there, I couldn't make out anything myself, though. She kept insisting on helping, never changing that fake polite voice that she had. I just kept saying no thank you, and eventually I started to pack up the tools and get myself ready to hit the road. And that's when this woman said, "I think you really need my help." Her voice changed instantly. It wasn't polite and delicate anymore. It was angry and vicious. "Let me help you." I was not having any of this anymore. I turned to the woman and in the meanest voice I could muster up, I said, "Okay, lady, you need to leave. I got my family in the car, and I'm not in the mood for all your crazy crap. If you don't leave, I'm calling the police right now, or taking care of this myself." I thought that my little threat might do the trick, but instead she started to laugh at me. I'd had enough and just turned around. She kept laughing and I opened the driver's side door. I put the keys in the cup holder, so all I had to do was push the start button when I entered the truck. I turned around for a moment and turned back only to see the woman mid-swing with a lug wrench, haphazardly attempting to strike me in the head. She didn't seem very lucid, so I was able to catch the blow with my hand and deflect it. I ended up kicking her in the knees and shin. I guess she fell to the ground. She started grunting and began to run to the side of the road she'd kept looking at earlier. At this point, without wasting any time, I sped off as fast as I could, constantly checking my mirrors for any signs of the woman or any cars following me. Thankfully, the last 30 minutes of my drive went by with no crazy people or issues whatsoever. I did tell my wife what happened when she woke up. She was angry I didn't just call the police right away. Honestly, she didn't seem to believe me. She called as soon as we got to the campsite and gave the police the entire description of what happened. She told about the woman's tattoo and exactly which road she'd confronted me on. I can't help but feel the woman will somehow find me and my family at this campsite. She clearly saw I had camping gear in my truck when she confronted me. I didn't realize until later, but I can't help but think she was somehow responsible for causing that flat tire in the first place. Now, I have no clear evidence to back that theory up. I'm gonna try and enjoy my trip, but I wanted to get that story out while the details were still clear in my head. I can't stop myself from wondering, what is it she wanted? Did she want my truck? Did she want to rob me? Or was it something worse? Wish me luck on my trip. If anything happens or any new developments come to light, I'll be sure to update everyone. But until then, I hope I never see that woman once more. My best friend and I decided to get jobs at the same place. It was a diner that had a look like it was from the 50s, even though it had only been open for a few years now. We were excited to work together, but it ended up being the worst decision I ever made. The problems really stemmed from the fact we were both incredibly competitive people. Both of us wanted to be the best employee, and it turned into a competition that actually made us hate each other. We were constantly trying to outdo one another, and I got tired of it pretty quickly. I started dating one of our co-workers. His name was Jim, and he was very sweet to me. I'd had a crush on him for quite a while, actually. The problem was, I had no idea my ex-best friend Tina also had a crush on him. We hadn't spoken on a personal level for months now, so there was no way I could have possibly known about this. To be honest, in reality, even if I did, it probably wouldn't have changed anything. We hadn't been friends for a while now. Jim and I were very respectful when it came to showing our affection, especially at work. We know a lot of people don't like PDA, so most of our affection on the job consisted of happy smiles and maybe a wink at each other every now and then. Anytime Tina saw this, she would scoff and act like she was going to throw up. I thought she was just being childish, and tried not to think anything of it. It stopped being childish and turned into her doing everything she could to sabotage me. She would do this every day at work. I knew she really wanted to get me fired, but her obsession with it was getting way too excessive. Scheduling was handled by our district manager. I had a very specific schedule set up because I was taking some college courses a few days a week. I had showed up for my Monday shift at 4:30 p.m. The second I walked in, my manager started yelling at me for being late. I was so confused. I always came in at 4:30 on Mondays. He pointed to the schedule, and according to that, I was over 6 hours late. I was given a formal warning, and Tina was standing right there smirking at me. It was obvious she had something to do with it, but I didn't want any more issues that day, so I just let it be. It got even worse the next week. I cleaned the bathroom out at the end of the day. I hated cleaning the restroom, but it had to be done. Our manager went around the restaurant after we had closed to make sure everything was looking good and we could all leave. When he came out of the bathroom, his face was pale and he was gagging. He could barely stand upright. When the door opened, the smell was unlike anything I'd ever experienced before. He yelled at me and asked why the bathroom hadn't been cleaned. I was adamant that I had cleaned it only 30 minutes ago. He told me to go look at the clean bathroom and let him know if I still thought it was clean. I walked in and was met with a horrible stench of, well, I'm sure you know what I'm talking about. It was everywhere. Someone had relieved themselves in that bathroom and hadn't even attempted to make it to the toilet. It was on the walls, the floors, the sinks, everywhere. I ran out of the bathroom and had tears running down my face. I was trying hard not to, but I threw up right there on the floor. I was confused and disgusted. I knew for a fact it had to be Tina. She was the only one who had gone in there after we closed. No matter how much I wanted to believe she wasn't capable of doing something like that, it was clearly her. She started laughing as she watched me get sick over the mess. I accused her in front of everyone, but she denied it and even started fake crying. She said I was awful for saying she would do something like that. Obviously, I had noticed it before and just didn't want to clean it up. Of course, everyone believed her. Her plan didn't go as well as she had hoped, though, because our manager was absolutely not going to allow any of us to clean all of that up. We actually had to hire a hazmat crew to come in and clean it up. It was considered too toxic for someone not trained to clean up all that human waste. I'm not even kidding. I got a text later that night from Tina. It was a bunch of poop emojis followed by laughing emojis. I couldn't believe I was actually friends with her before. And the week after that happened, I showed up for work. Jim was furious with me and I asked him why over and over again, but he wouldn't talk to me. I opened my locker and inside was a printed up picture of a screenshot. Apparently me texting Tina telling her I had cheated on Jim. I told him it was photoshopped and even let him look through my phone. It didn't matter. He broke up with me right then and there. Tina decided to rub the salt in the wound, so to speak. That same week, she told our manager I was interested in him and too scared to tell him. Of course, that wasn't true at all. It made for the most uncomfortable day of my life. Anytime I walked over to him, he made sure to stand almost 5 feet away from me at all times. I didn't know why and finally asked him, and was shocked to hear that he thought I wanted to start a relationship with him. I told him that was not true, but he clearly didn't believe me. Tina also started rumors with our other coworkers, saying I was talking behind their backs and saying awful stuff about them. She made everyone at the restaurant despise me. No matter how much I wish I could tell you it had a happy ending, it didn't. I was fired only 2 months after. I told our manager it was her who was behind everything and that I was a good employee, but he just told me I should get help for my obvious mental issues. I turned in all my work clothes and didn't even bother saying goodbye to everyone since they all hated me anyway. I ended up getting super depressed after that. No other place in town wanted to hire me because Tina had sent out a mass email to most local restaurants telling them about what happened at the diner. I guess a bad reputation, false or not, really does follow you. I ended up moving back in with my parents in my hometown, a few states away. I was able to find a good job doing something I actually liked and moved on in life. Last I heard, Tina is still working at that crappy diner, which makes me feel a lot better. She's definitely not as happy as me. I get very paranoid when making friends at work now. I really don't want to meet another person like her and have to go through that all over again. This happened around the time I was 16. I'd just started my first job at a breakfast place that was open all hours of the day. It was around 20 minutes from where I lived, and I'd been working there for around a month or so. And that's when I started noticing the same guy coming in every single day. He always asked for me to be the one to make his order. He seemed friendly at first, but it started getting creepy when he began asking my coworkers for details about me. He would just sit in the restaurant for hours on end, staring at me the entire time. I told my managers how uncomfortable it made me, but they refused to do anything about it. Apparently, he spent so much money at the restaurant every week that they didn't want to jeopardize getting that income since it was a small local restaurant that didn't make much money to begin with. I tried changing my schedule around times I knew he didn't come in, but he seemed to always adapt. He learned my new schedule very quickly every time and fit himself into it always. It started making me so severely uncomfortable. I knew I wasn't going to be able to put up with it for much longer. It reached its peak when he was caught taking photos under my skirt as I was taking his order. I happened to be looking down at my notepad and saw him reaching his phone under me. I screamed and kicked his hand instinctually. My manager came out, and as I was running toward the back of the restaurant, he stopped me and asked me what was wrong. I told him what happened, and finally they were willing to do something about what I'd been telling them. This had been going on for months now. He walked right up to this perv and yelled in his face. He said that he had to leave right now. I didn't see what happened exactly because I was hiding in the back room, but I could hear their conversation clear as day. The guy denied taking any photos and said he was not going to leave. The second my manager threatened to call the police and have them search his phone, he agreed to leave right away though. My manager came into the back room I was in and told me he was sorry. He was sorry they'd let it get to that point where the guy felt so emboldened to do what he did. I thanked him, but I was still mad it was something I ever had to go through in the first place. Something should have been done the second that man did something to make me uncomfortable, but money meant more than my safety apparently. They let me leave for the day, and my manager was nice enough to walk me to my car, just in case the guy was waiting outside for me. He wasn't, but it's better to be safe than sorry. I got in my car and started crying. I felt like the police should have still been called, but when I mentioned that to my manager, he said he didn't want unnecessary drama. It would only make the restaurant look bad. I didn't care though. I wasn't going to let this go. I decided it would be best to go straight from the restaurant to the police station to file a report immediately, and the police seemed to take me much more seriously. It was a breath of fresh air to see concern in someone else's face when I told them what had been going on. The officer told me I needed to quit that job before what was happening turned into a full-blown stalker situation. Believe me, I really wanted to, but I couldn't afford to leave a job. It had taken me way too long to find one there in the first place, and there weren't many places to work in the town I lived in. I really needed the money. I guess you could say I was putting money over my safety too. I told the officers I wouldn't be able to quit. Being the awesome people they were though, they offered to show up at the restaurant after my shifts for a while to make sure I got home okay. You might be thinking, there's no way they would do that, especially in a small town. But it was a really small town, and they had nothing else to do. One of the officers also knew my dad and was friends with him back in the day, so he wanted to make sure nothing bad happened to me. The next couple weeks went by without incident. There was no sign of the guy. I was still grateful to the officers, who made good on their word and escorted me home every day I got off work. I was finally starting to feel better about things, since it had been a while since I'd last seen the man. Of course, that couldn't last forever. It was a regular Friday night at the restaurant. My manager and other co-workers had left for the night. All I had to do was clean the bathroom before locking up. I saw the police car pull up outside the front doors and was grateful I'd be leaving soon. I grabbed my cleaning supplies and made my way into the bathroom. It had already been swept and mopped, so I just had to wipe down the sinks and clean the toilets. I opened the first stall and did what I had to do. As I was wiping though, I heard a light cough, almost like someone was clearing their throat. My heart started to race. I wanted nothing more than to just run out of there, but if there was someone in there, I didn't want them to know I knew. I stepped out of the stall quietly, and made my way toward the bathroom door. Just as I was about to pull it open, I heard footsteps behind me. I turned around and there he was. I didn't know how long he'd been there waiting for me, and I didn't really want to find out what he planned to do to me in the bathroom. I asked him what he was doing there. We were closed. No matter how creepy I found him, there was no way I could have prepared myself for his blatant response. He started touching himself in front of me and said, "I just want you so bad. I'm so into you. You're so sexy. Please, please just let me have you. Just for a little bit." He paused for a few seconds. "Or I can always just take you." Tears were beginning to well up in my eyes. I was trying to think of an escape plan that could get me out of that restaurant and to the officer before he could get me. Fight or flight kicked in. I whipped around and threw open the door. I started running as fast as I could toward the front of the restaurant. I heard the man's footsteps behind me. He was gaining on me. I began to panic. I didn't know if my heart was racing because of the running or because I knew he was this close to grabbing me. I was only a few feet from the door when I felt his body press against me. He tackled me to the floor, and I started to scream and kick and fight back as much as possible. The guy was strong, and he was heavy. There was no way I was going to be able to fight him off alone. I looked around for anything I could find to hit him with. The only thing I was able to grab onto was a pen I dropped earlier in the day. I snatched it off the floor and went with my first instinct. I jabbed it directly into his eye. He yelled in pain, and his body flew backward off of me. I got up and threw open the door. I screamed for the officer outside. When he saw me, he got out of his car and drew his weapon. He called for backup on his walkie-talkie and ran inside the restaurant. He held the man down at gunpoint, and before I knew it, several more officers arrived, as well as an ambulance. I only had minor scrapes and bruises. The man was arrested, and as of this moment, he's still awaiting trial. I just hope I can get justice, and he can be put away for a long time, so no other woman has to experience what I did at the hands of a man who could have easily ruined or even ended my life. This story took place approximately 15 years ago. My parents let me have two of my closest friends over, and they set up a tent for us to camp in the backyard. My mom bought a bunch of snacks, and my dad ordered us a pizza and drinks before they left to go out for dinner. We were so excited to be in this tent. We dragged as much food as we could to the backyard and started eating and chatting. We went over our schedule of scary stories, s'mores, and whatever else we had planned for the night. We ate as much dinner as we could, and then started sharing stories of our crushes, and if we had enough courage to ask them to the dance when school started the following year. I remember at one point we were trying to set up a blanket and pillow fort inside the tent. We were unsuccessful. The whole time, though, I felt like I'd been hearing something weird outside. I unzipped the screen, or the window as you could call it, so I could get a peek at what was happening out there. I didn't see anything at first. About 5 minutes later, my friends said they thought they'd heard something too. It sounded like something had brushed up against the tent. My friend Audrey looked out the open screened window and said, "See? Something is back there. Do you see it?" I looked out and saw this white symbol jump out to me very quickly. I couldn't help it. I screamed, followed by my friends screaming, and we ran into the house. We went into the bathroom and locked ourselves in there and tried to be as quiet as possible. Soon after, we heard footsteps in the house. The door began to jiggle, and we all screamed at the top of our lungs. Audrey was now on the phone with the police. While she was on the phone, we were still screaming. We slowly opened the door, and my parents were standing right there. Still on the phone with the police, my dad grabbed the phone. "I'm sorry, officers. This is the father. I was just playing a joke on the girls during their sleepover. Being adults now, I'm surprised the cops didn't show up anyway, but it is a small town, and my dad knew everyone. I'm sure he ended up talking to one of his friends and saying everything was alright. My friends and I were pretty angry at first, but my dad was a jokester. We got over it pretty quickly. He offered to help get the fire started for us and to help us out with our s'mores as well. He played some light music and got the fire going in the backyard. He kept asking if there was anything else we needed from the store or from inside. I think he was feeling guilty for scaring us so badly. We got tired pretty quickly and made our way to bed in the tents. We talked about anything and everything until we started dozing off and falling asleep, one by one. I think I remember being the last one awake, wanting to make sure my friends were comfortable and could fall asleep well. I remember waking up suddenly. It was pitch dark, and the sound of crickets was ringing in the air. I felt like I'd heard something else too, but maybe it had just been in a dream. I heard one of my friends snoring and breathing pretty heavily. I assumed it must have been them that woke me. They were completely zonked out, all of them. I tried to doze off. The breathing and snoring became louder, so I sat up to see if I could see which friend it was coming from. As I sat up, I was at eye level with the window screen. It felt like I was having flashbacks from earlier. I saw something moving. Then all of a sudden, I heard the zipper for the tent door open. I yelled out, "Dad, knock it off. Earlier was enough, and I want my friends to actually come over again." I didn't say anything else. My friends were starting to stir now. They were quickly waking up. I told my dad to get out of there before he ruined the whole thing for me. I can still hear the response that came back in my head. A voice that was very clearly not my father's called out to me, "How do you know it's me?" My whole body felt like it froze. The only thing I could think to do was grab my friends' hands and pull them. I basically dragged them all as we ran to the house. I don't remember anyone else screaming or yelling. I think my friends were more confused than anything else. I went right into my parents' room and told my dad what was going on. He jumped right out of bed and went outside. I could hear him yelling something. Then he ran back in and got on the phone. He told my mom to stay inside with me and my friends. He went back outside and eventually we saw flashing lights. He was outside talking to the police for about 20 minutes if I had to guess. He came back inside and talked to my mom first, then to me and my friends. He said there was a guy that seemed to be causing problems in the neighborhood that night. Thankfully, they soon caught him, and we were all safe now. He said he was really sorry for scaring us so much earlier, and was happy everyone was okay. He asked my friends if they wanted to call their parents and go home. Audrey said that she was fine and that she wanted to stay, but May called her mom and just went home. Audrey and I decided to take our little camping night to the living room instead. My dad got us comfortable and made an impromptu pillow and blanket fort for us. There were only a few hours until the morning. We got up early and my mom and dad made us breakfast, then asked if we wanted to have a pool day. I remember that day being very fun and being exactly what we needed to get our minds off the night before. I'm still friends with the girls to this day, and I don't think any one of us have been camping since then. December 3rd of last year, I was playing soccer with my friends on our high school soccer field. It was during lunch and relatively calm. That was when all of a sudden at the McDonald's literally across the street, I began to hear gunshots ring out. All of the off-campus students were hauling ass back to the school, jumping fences and running through traffic and everything. We saw cops storming around, and businesses by the McDonald's freaking the fuck out. They couldn't seem to find the shooter. The staff started bringing all the students into the school. You couldn't tell me a school shooting was not about to go down. About 2 hours after lockdown, pictures of the shooter started being distributed. It was indeed a student at my school. Apparently, there was another shooter on campus too. Well, guess which lockdown room the shooter was in? Out of all rooms, the one I was in. The cops came in, requesting for him to come out peacefully. He started resisting, but fortunately they were able to take control before he could do much. Another hour or so later, we were all free. We emerged from the school grounds to see news trucks everywhere. Interestingly enough, my friend and I had originally planned to go to McDonald's that day for lunch, but we had to cancel because of tutoring. Thank God. What is up, guys? Blue Spooky here. Thank you guys so much for watching, especially if you made it this far to the end of the video. If you liked the video, please be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe if you feel so inclined. If you have any feedback for me as well, be sure to leave that in the comments below the video. If you guys have a story you'd like to send in, or if you'd like to contact me for any reasons, there will be links to my social media in the description below the video, including my Facebook, Gmail, and Twitter accounts. Go ahead and send me a message on any of those, and I'll try to get to you as soon as possible. If you do decide to send in a story, please be sure to include in the tagline what the name of the story is if it has one, what type of story it is if it has one, and how you'd like to be credited in the description below the video. Please make sure to include as much detail as you feel comfortable with, and try to use as much proper grammar as possible to make sure you have the highest chance of appearing in a future video. Overall, I think that's pretty much it for now, guys, so thank you so much for watching, and I hope you guys have a great day.